Dr. Kylie Dodsworth, and I want to talk to you about the microbiome. What does that mean? That means the microbes or the bacteria that live within our gut, and biome is kind of like a family or a community. So the microbiome are about the gut bugs that are a little community that work together, but they're also part of what we need for our body to work properly. So we're actually all living in community. And what's really fascinating is the fact that we've got more than 3 kilograms worth of bacteria in our gut. Trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of these little cells. In fact, there's more DNA material in our microbiome bugs than there are in our whole body. So they're actually more than we are as far as the cell numbers go and the genetic material. So if we don't work with them, we're in trouble. And so that means that we really have to have a good understanding of what creates balance and health for these little bugs, because they then in turn create our balance and our health. So understanding the microbiome or the gut flora is really vital for us to have good health. Now, aside from the fact that there's so many of them and we need them, it's also about the fact that they line the intestines and they do the work of our digestion, a lot of the work for our digestion. So if they're not present, then we don't digest our food properly, we don't get the nutrients that we need. And in addition, these little bacteria can make things, some of which are good for us and we want, but some of them can be bad for us. So if we get certain overgrowth of bacteria, certain populations of those bacteria, they can make more waste products than what we need, or there's just too much that becomes toxic for us. So having the right balance in our gut is absolutely vital to our health. So there are many, many different types of bacteria in our gut. People often have heard about probiotics. Probiotics are supplements you can take as a capsule or a powder, or they might be mixed into something else, which is certain types of bacteria. You might have heard the names Bifidobacter or Lactobacillus, and within those two families there are different strains or varieties. So they're a tiny part of what's going on in the bacteria in our gut. They're important and there's good value in having them, and we must have some, but they're a tiny fraction of what's going on. There's a lot more complications and different families. So the dominant species in our gut, there's one called E. coli, and there are bad strains of E. coli that can make us sick, but there are really important strains we need to have to be well. So the E. coli actually produces in our gut something called serotonin. You might have heard of that around the brain and brain chemistry, but in our gut, the gut produces serotonin far more than what the brain does. And one of the roles of the serotonin is to help the bowel wall to move and contract and move things through the digestion. So if we're lacking in our E. coli, we're low in serotonin, that does impact a little bit with the brain health, but also definitely impacts on that movement of the bowel. So we can get constipation if we're low in E. coli. The other main family is one called Bacteroides. They help us to break down our fibres and produce things called volatile fatty acids. Don't worry about the name particularly, but essentially understand that there's something called butyrate and other varieties of these fatty acids that are literally the food source for the cells that line the intestines. We call them the colonocytes for colon cells. So the cells that line the inside of the intestine, they actually get fed by what's inside the bowel rather than from the blood outside the bowel coming in. So they're relying on those bacteria to feed them and nourish them and look after them. And we have to have this butyrate as a food source, and we need the Bacteroides to be able to make that butyrate. So if we're low in that family, we don't handle fibres very well, so we can get bloating and pain when we're having fibres, which are vegetables and some of our legumes and things like that. And if we're low in that, we also can get the colon cells, those colonocytes, not being nourished properly. And when they're not working efficiently, the barrier or the border between our gut and our blood gets impaired. So that can be a reason why we can start to get what we call a permeable gut wall or a leaky gut. So there's a couple of the main families. There's other families there as well. And if we get an overgrowth of one called Streptococcus or one called Enterococcus, those ones love to ferment foods, particularly foods that are high in fructose, which is fruit sugar, or sucrose, which is our standard sugar. So those two ones actually will ferment a whole range of different foods that are high in those. And you might have heard of FODMAP foods. That stands for fermentable, oligo and disaccharide sugars, and polyols. So these bacteria ferment these particular foods, and in doing that create a whole lot of gas, which can make us bloated and cause stretching and pain in the gut. And they also make something called lactic acid. Now, lactic acid is acidic, so it makes the gut acidic, which is a bit irritating, but it also gets from the gut into the blood and travels around our body. So lactic acid you might also have heard of when we're doing exercises and using our muscles, we get a build-up of lactic acid. So in this case, it's coming from your gut, but it still goes around the body. So you can actually start to get muscle aches and pains even without moving. And you can also get more aches and pains with just a little bit of exercise because you've already got that lactic acid present. You can also get lactic acid up to the brain, and that contributes to poor sleep and some anxiety and things like brain fog. So just from having these gut bugs out of balance, we can have difficulties with digestion, you can have poor movement and constipation, you can have a leaky gut wall, you can have lactic acid causing brain fog and muscle aches and pains and mind going blank and sleep disturbances. So as you can see, there's like multiple functions here, let alone the digestive capacity for nutrients getting into our body. So looking after these guys in the gut are really important. Understanding them is really important. There's a whole new world of discovery that we're going on with now. You know, natural medicine's known for thousands of years that the gut's important. Science is slowly catching up, but the more we're catching up, the more we're seeing and understanding, the more we realise that there's complexity there. So what do we need to do about this? We need to feed and nourish these guys properly. That's about giving them foods that they've evolved with. So we're back to all the natural healthy dietary stuff. Not many processed foods, artificial colours and flavours, herbicides, pesticides. They're all bad for these little gut bugs. Even things like gluten. We talk about food intolerances. Sometimes we're not actually intolerant to the gluten or the wheat. We're actually intolerant to the pesticide that they use, the herbicide and pesticide they use, which is Roundup, or something called glyphosate. And that actually then gets into our gut and kills off our little bacteria. So we're actually reacting to the glyphosate or Roundup that's been used on the wheat rather than the actual gluten or the wheat product itself. So we have to be mindful about nourishing and looking after these guys, eating organic food if you can, eating food that's not processed, keeping artificial colours and flavours away, not too many sugary foods and fermented foods. Little bit's okay, but not too much. We can do some probiotics, but that's a tiny part of the story. It's more about having a wide variety of healthy natural foods and then looking after the bacteria as best we can. And if we need to, get into the detail and get the testing done so we can do some rebalancing. So if you'd like to know any more about that, you can send any questions to me. My website's on the bottom of the page here, and I'm Dr. Kylie Dodsworth, and I look forward to seeing you next time. All the best. Bye for now.